Captain Alex Morgan stood on the bridge of his ship and looked at the screen that showed nothing but darkness where the Altarian system used to be. 3 days ago, that place had 7 planets full of life, and now there was only empty space and floating rocks. The Xanthari had come and gone like a plague of space locusts, leaving nothing alive behind them. Alex turned to his communications officer, Katie Brooks, who was reading reports from across the galaxy. Her face was pale and her hands shook as she read each new message. Every report told the same story. The Xanthari were moving faster than anyone thought possible. They would arrive at a system, and within hours, every living thing would be dead or captured. Sir, the Valderon Empire just sent out a distress call, Katie said, without looking up from her screen. They say the Xanthari have taken 4 more of their worlds. The Empire used to control 50 systems, and now they only have 3 left. Alex walked over to the tactical display where Commander Ryan Davis was studying the enemy movements. Ryan had spent his whole life learning about alien species and their ways of war. He knew more about galactic politics than most ambassadors, but even he looked confused and worried. "The pattern makes no sense, Captain," Ryan said, as he pointed to the red marks on the star map. "Every other species in galaxy history has wanted something. Territory or resources, or slaves, or tribute. But the Xanthari just destroy everything. They take what they need to feed their ships and kill the rest." The bridge fell quiet, except for the soft beeping of computers. Alex had been in space for 20 years and had seen many battles, but nothing like this. The Xanthari were not just an enemy army. They were like a disease that killed everything it touched. A new message came through the communication system, and Katie read it with growing horror. "Captain, it is from the Korath Dominion. They are asking for immediate military assistance. The Xanthari have broken through their psionic defenses and are attacking their whole world." Alex felt his stomach drop. The Korath were the most powerful mind warriors in the galaxy. If the Xanthari could defeat them, then no one was safe. He had met Korath soldiers before, and they could kill enemies just by thinking about it. But apparently, even that was not enough against these new invaders. "How long until the Korath homeworld falls?" Alex asked. Ryan checked his calculations and shook his head. "Based on previous attack patterns, maybe 2 days, maybe less." The communication system crackled again, and this time it was Admiral Stone calling from Earth Command. Alex accepted the call and saw her tired face appear on the main screen. She looked like she had not slept in days, and her usually perfect uniform was wrinkled and stained. "Captain Morgan, I need you to divert to the Nexus system immediately," Admiral Stone said. "We have reports of Meridian refugees fleeing the Xanthari advance. Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Parker is coordinating the evacuation, but she needs naval support." Alex nodded and gave orders to change course. As his ship turned toward the Nexus system, he thought about how quickly everything had changed. 6 months ago, the biggest worry for human ships was trade disputes and border patrols. Now they were racing across the galaxy, trying to save entire species from extinction. The journey to Nexus took 8 hours at maximum hyperspace speed. When they arrived, Alex could see the chaos immediately. Hundreds of ships filled the space around the planet. Most were civilian vessels packed with refugees, but scattered among them were the burning wrecks of military ships that had tried to fight the Xanthari and failed. Lisa Parker contacted them as soon as they dropped out of hyperspace. She was on the surface of Nexus Prime, coordinating the evacuation of the last Meridian survivors. The Meridians were spider-like beings who had controlled the galaxy's trade routes for thousands of years. Now they were running for their lives. "Captain Morgan, thank goodness you are here," Lisa said over the radio. Her voice was strained, and Alex could hear explosions in the background. "We have about 50,000 Meridians still on the surface, but the Xanthari scouts are getting closer. They will be here in hours. Alex ordered his ship to move into orbit and begin loading refugees. The process was slow and dangerous. Every few minutes, Xanthari fighter ships would appear and attack. The evacuation vessels. Alex's gunners shot down what they could, but more kept coming, down on the surface. Lisa was working with Elder Zethera, the leader of the Meridian survivors. The old alien was tall and thin with 8 legs and 4 arms. His skin was gray, and his large eyes showed the fear that all his people felt. Human soldier, Elder Zethara, said to Lisa through his translation device, "Your species is young and has not seen what we have seen. The Xanthari cannot be stopped. They have destroyed civilizations that were old when your son was young. Save your people and flee while you still can." Lisa looked at the elder and saw the defeat in his eyes. The Meridians had fought the Xanthari for weeks and lost everything. Their beautiful crystal cities were now smoking ruins. Their trade ships were broken metal floating in space. Their children were dead or captured to be used as food for the enemy. "Elder, we are not going to abandon you," Lisa said as she helped load more refugees onto the transport ships. "Humans do not run from fights. We run toward them." The evacuation continued through the night. Ship after ship lifted off from the surface, carrying Meridian families to safety. But the Xanthari were getting closer. Long-range sensors showed a massive enemy fleet approaching the system. Lisa knew they had maybe 6 more hours before the real attack began. As the last transport ship prepared to leave, Elder Zethara grabbed Lisa's armored hand with his trembling claws. "Human warrior, I have lived for 300 of your years. I have seen empires rise and fall, but I have never seen anything like the Xanthari. They are not just conquerors. They are the end of all life." Lisa looked into the elder's ancient eyes and saw something that frightened her more than any enemy. She saw hopelessness. The Meridians had given up. So had the Valderans and the Alterians, and probably the Korath too. The entire galaxy was surrendering to the Xanthari without really fighting. "Elder," Lisa said as she helped him into the transport ship, "maybe your people have forgotten how to fight because you have been at peace for so long. But humans, remember, we have been fighting wars for our entire history, and we have never learned how to quit." The last transport ship lifted off just as the first Xanthari scouts entered the atmosphere. Lisa watched from the deck of Captain Morgan's ship as Nexus Prime burned below them. Another world lost, another species driven from their home. Another victory for the darkness that was spreading across the galaxy. But as the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying their refugee passengers to safety, Lisa made a decision. The galaxy had lost hope because they had forgotten how to fight back. They had grown soft during their long peace. But humans were different. Humans knew that some things were worth dying for. The war was just beginning, and Lisa knew that humanity would not be running away from it. They would be running straight toward the enemy, with guns blazing and hearts full of the kind of stubborn courage that had carried them from their small blue planet to the stars themselves. President Nathan Cole walked slowly to the podium in the Great Hall of the United Earth Assembly. Behind him, massive holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy, and it was not good news. Red zones marked where the Xanthari had already attacked. Yellow zones showed where they were expected to strike next. The green zones that represented free space were getting smaller. Every day, the assembly hall was packed with representatives from every nation on Earth. Some looked scared. Some looked angry. But all of them knew that humanity was facing the biggest decision in their history. They could try to hide and hope the Xanthari never found Earth, or they could join the fight and risk everything to help their galactic neighbors. "Fellow humans," President Cole began in a voice that carried clearly through the silent hall. 6 months ago, we were just another young species learning our place among the stars. Today, we are being asked to help save those stars from an enemy, unlike any the galaxy has ever seen. The president gestured to the holographic displays and the red zones that seemed to grow larger even as they watched. The Xanthari have destroyed 7 star systems completely. They have driven the Valderon Empire to the edge of extinction. They have broken the Korath Dominion and scattered the Altarian Republic. Billions of people are dead, and billions more are refugees fleeing for their lives. A murmur ran through the assembly. Many of the representatives had never heard of these alien species before humans joined the galactic community. But they all understood what extinction meant. They all knew what it was like to face an enemy that wanted to destroy everything you had ever loved. The Korath Dominion has offered us their entire database of psionic technologies. President Cole continued. The Valderons have promised us their shield generators and energy weapons. The Altarians will give us access to their hyperspace navigation systems. All they ask in return is that we fight beside them against the Xanthari. General. Rebecca Stone stood up from her seat in the front row. She was the commander of all human military forces and had been planning for this moment since the first reports of Xanthari attacks reached Earth. Her uniform was crisp and her back was straight, but her eyes showed the weight of what she was about to recommend. Mr. President, General Stone said in a clear voice, "Our military analysis shows that the Xanthari fight differently than any enemy we have studied. They do not try to capture territory or control resources. They simply destroy everything in their path and move on to the next target." She activated her own holographic display, showing detailed recordings of Xanthari attacks. The images were horrifying. Organic ships that looked like giant insects surrounded planets and fired biological weapons that killed every living thing on the surface. Then smaller ships would land and harvest the dead biomass to feed the Xanthari war machine. Traditional. Galactic warfare relies on rules and protocols that were developed during thousands of years of civilized conflict. General Stone explained, the Xanthari follow no rules. They show no mercy. They cannot be negotiated with or bought off or scared away. The only way to stop them is to destroy them completely. Dr. Paul Mitchell stepped forward to address the assembly. He was the head of Earth's military research division and had been working day and night to find ways to fight the Xanthari. His clothes were rumpled and his hair was messy, but his eyes were bright with the excitement of discovery. Fellow humans, we have one advantage that no other species in the galaxy possesses, Dr. Mitchell announced. We remember how to fight total war. While our galactic neighbors have enjoyed peace for generations, we have spent our entire history perfecting the art of warfare. He brought up images of human weapons and tactics that looked primitive, compared to the energy weapons and force shields used by other species. But Dr. Mitchell smiled as he showed them. Our weapons may be crude, but they are effective. Our tactics may be brutal, but they win battles. And most importantly, our soldiers know how to adapt and improvise when their original plans fail. The assembly listened carefully as Dr. Mitchell explained how human military doctrine was different from anything the Xanthari had faced. Other species fought according to ancient traditions and formal strategies. Humans fought to win by any means necessary. They changed tactics in the middle of battle. They used weapons in ways they were never designed for. They turned every piece of equipment into a potential weapon. Colonel Jake Thompson walked onto the stage wearing the combat armor of the Terran Marine Corps. The armor was scarred and dented from a dozen different battles on a dozen different worlds. He had been fighting in small conflicts across human space for 15 years, and now he was ready for the biggest fight of his life. Mr. President, Colonel Thompson said with the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle, the Marines are ready. We have been training for hostile environment combat since we were teenagers. We know how to fight in zero gravity and toxic atmospheres and extreme temperatures. We know how to survive when our equipment fails and our supplies run out. He gestured to the images of Xanthari bio-warriors that Dr. Mitchell had shown earlier. The alien soldiers were large and fast, and covered in natural armor. They looked like killing machines designed by evolution itself. But Colonel Thompson did not look impressed or worried. Every other species in the galaxy has specialized warriors trained for specific types of combat. Colonel Thompson explained. The Korath have their psionics. The Valderons have their energy weapon specialists. The Altarians have their pilots. But humans have generalists. Our Marines can fight in any environment against any enemy with any weapons they can get there. Hands-on. Admiral Katie Brooks stood up to give the naval perspective. She had commanded human fleets in patrol actions and anti-piracy operations, but never in a real war. Still, her voice was steady, and her manner was calm as she addressed the assembly. Power. Ships are not as advanced as Korath vessels or as elegant as Altarian designs, Admiral Brooks admitted. But they are tough and reliable, and our crews know how to fix them with spare parts and determination. More importantly, our tactical doctrine emphasizes aggressive action rather than defensive positioning. She showed the assembly recordings of human fleet exercises where ships would deliberately ram enemy vessels or use suicide attacks to protect larger ships. The tactics looked crazy compared to the careful maneuvering that other species preferred, but they were devastatingly effective. The Xanthari have evolved to counter the methodical strategies used by civilized species, Admiral Brooks explained, but they have never faced opponents who fight with controlled chaos. They have never dealt with enemies who view their own ships as expendable weapons rather than precious resources to be protected. Captain Maria Santos stepped forward to represent the fighter pilots. She had flown combat missions in 3 different star systems and had shot down pirates and smugglers and rebels. But she had never faced anything like the Xanthari biofighters that could heal themselves and fight without pilots. Human pilots train differently than aliens, Captain Santos said, with a grin that showed she was looking forward to the challenge. Other species rely on computer assistance and automated systems. We train to fly manually with nothing but our instincts and reflexes. When their computers fail, they are helpless. When our computers fail, we just fly harder. President Cole listened to all the military presentations and then looked out at the assembly. The representatives were talking quietly among themselves, and he could see that they were beginning to understand what was being asked of them. Earth could try to hide and hope the Xanthari never found them. Or they could take the fight to the enemy and risk everything to save the galaxy. The choice before us is simple, President Cole said as the hall fell silent again. We can abandon our allies and hope that the Xanthari will be satisfied with destroying the rest of the galaxy. Or we can honor the treaties we signed when we joined the galactic community and fight beside our neighbors against a common enemy. He paused and looked directly at each section of the assembly. I have seen the reports from our military commanders. I have studied the tactical analysis and the strategic projections. The experts tell me that we have a chance to stop the Xanthari, but only if we commit everything we have to the fight. The vote was not even close. Representative after representative stood up to declare their support for military action. Nation after nation pledged their ships and soldiers and resources to the war effort. Within hours, the assembly had authorized the largest military mobilization in human history. As the representatives filed out of the hall, President Cole remained at the podium looking at the holographic displays. The red zones were still growing, and the Xanthari were still advancing. But for the first time since the crisis began, he felt something that the rest of the galaxy had lost. He felt hope. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, and Captain Alex Morgan immediately knew they were looking at something no human had ever seen before. The Xanthari bioships surrounded the dying planet like a swarm of massive insects feeding on a corpse. Each ship was alive and pulsing with organic weapons that glowed with sickly green light. Admiral Cady Brooks stood on the bridge of the flagship TDF Unity and watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. The Xanthari fleet was huge, but it moved like a single living creature. Ships would merge together and split apart in patterns that made no sense according to normal fleet tactics. It was like watching a school of fish or a flock of birds, except each individual was the size of a city. "All ships, this is Admiral Brooks," she announced over the fleet communications channel. "We are looking at an enemy unlike anything in the tactical manuals. Standard engagement protocols will not work here. Every captain is authorized to improvise and adapt as needed. Our goal is simple: drive them away from the planet and rescue any survivors we can find." Commander Susan Lai checked her fighter squadron and felt her heart pounding with excitement and fear. She had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of Xanthari biofighters. They looked like giant wasps with wings that shimmered like oil and stingers that crackled with bioelectric energy. "Red Squadron, this is Commander Lee," she said over the squadron frequency. "Remember your training, but forget everything you learned about fighting normal ships. These things are alive, and they think. But they have never fought humans before, and they do not know what we are capable of." The battle began when a Xanthari bioship noticed the human fleet and sent out a challenge signal that sounded like the scream of a dying animal. Admiral Brooks responded by ordering the entire fleet to attack at maximum speed with all weapons firing. The sight of 200 human ships charging directly at them seemed to confuse the Xanthari, who had expected the careful maneuvering that other species preferred. Captain Steve Rogers commanded the destroyer TDF Vengeance and led the first wave of the attack. His ship was small and fast and armed with nuclear missiles that the Xanthari had never encountered before. When his first salvo hit a bioship, the explosion tore through its living hull and sent glowing green blood floating through space. "All ships, this is Captain Rogers," he called out over the radio. "Nuclear weapons are effective against bioship hulls. Target their weapon clusters and propulsion organs. These things can heal from small wounds, but massive trauma will kill them." The Xanthari responded to the human attack with tactics that defied understanding. Bioships would suddenly split into smaller vessels or merge together into larger ones. They fired living projectiles that hunted their targets like guided missiles. Some ships simply exploded and scattered corrosive spores that ate through human armor. Commander Ryan Davis coordinated the electronic warfare efforts from his position on the flagship. He had studied alien technologies for years, but the Xanthari bioships used no electronics at all. They communicated through biological signals that human computers could not intercept or jam. "Admiral, the enemy is not using any technology we recognize," Ryan reported. "Their ships are controlled by living nervous systems. We cannot hack them or disrupt their communications. But that also means they cannot hack us or predict our tactics." Down on the surface of Kepler Prime, Colonel Jake Thompson was leading the first human ground assault against Xanthari forces. The enemy had been occupying the planet for weeks and had turned the major cities into breeding grounds for new bioships. The sight was horrifying, but Jake had seen worse things during the urban warfare training on Earth. "Marines, this is Colonel Thompson," he announced over the tactical network. "The enemy soldiers look scary, but they are just big bugs. Aim for the joints in their armor and use explosives against their larger forms. Remember that we have been training for this kind of fight our entire careers." The Xanthari ground forces were unlike anything the Marines had faced in training, but Jake's soldiers adapted quickly. The enemy warriors were large and fast and covered in natural armor, but they fought according to instinctive patterns. Humans fought with unpredictable creativity that confused and frustrated the Bio-Warriors. Lieutenant Amy Foster led her squad through the ruins of what had been the capital city. The Xanthari had turned the buildings into organic structures that pulsed and breathed like living tissue. Her Marines used flamethrowers and high explosives to clear each structure room by room. "Contact front," one of her soldiers called out as a group of Xanthari warriors rounded a corner. The aliens were 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and natural weapons that could cut through steel. But Amy's squad did not retreat or take cover. They charged forward with combat knives and shotguns, and the kind of desperate courage that only humans seem to possess. The space battle continued for hours, with neither side able to gain a clear advantage. The Xanthari had superior numbers, and their bioships could heal from damage that would destroy normal vessels. But the humans fought with a combination of high technology and primitive tactics that the enemy could not counter. Captain Maria Santos piloted her fighter through a swarm of Xanthari biofighters and used tactics that would have gotten her court-martialed in peacetime. She deliberately rammed enemy ships with her reinforced nose cone. She used her fighter's exhaust to burn biofighters that got too close. She even ejected her spare fuel tanks and detonated them manually to create improvised bombs. All pilots. "This is Captain Santos," she called out over the fighter frequency. "These biofighters heal fast, but they die if you damage their brain clusters. Look for the glowing nerve centers behind their eyes. One good hit that will drop them permanently." The turning point came when Admiral Brooks made a decision that shocked both her own officers and the Xanthari. She ordered 3 damaged human ships to ram the largest bioship in the enemy formation. The captains of those ships did not hesitate or ask for confirmation. They simply turned their vessels toward the target and accelerated to maximum speed. The impact was devastating. The bioship was the size of a space station and served as the command center for the entire Xanthari fleet. When 3 human destroyers slammed into it at relativistic speeds, the explosion lit up half the system. The bioship died instantly, and its death scream was transmitted through the biological communication network to every other Xanthari vessel. For a moment, the entire enemy fleet seemed to freeze in confusion. The bioships stopped maneuvering, and their weapons fell silent. The Xanthari had evolved as a collective organism, and the sudden death of their command ship left them temporarily paralyzed. Admiral Brooks did not waste the opportunity. "All ships, concentrate fire on the largest remaining bioships," she ordered. "Hit them while they are confused. Show them what happens when they fight humans." The human fleet poured everything they had into the stunned Xanthari formation. Nuclear missiles and kinetic projectiles and energy weapons tore through bioship hulls faster than they could heal. Captain Rogers led a squadron of destroyers in close-range attacks that left glowing green blood floating throughout the battle zone. On the surface, Colonel Thompson's Marines were advancing through the enemy breeding grounds with flamethrowers and demolition charges. The Xanthari ground forces seemed to have lost their coordination and were fighting as individual creatures rather than an organized army. Jake's soldiers pressed their advantage and began systematically destroying the organic structures that the enemy had built. "All ground units, this is Colonel Thompson," he announced as his Marines cleared another breeding facility. "The enemy is falling back. Maintain pressure and do not let them regroup. We have them on the run for the first time since this war started." The space battle reached its climax when the remaining Xanthari bioships suddenly began retreating toward the edge of the system. Commander Susan Lee led her fighter squadron in pursuit and watched in amazement as the enemy fleet fled without attempting to cover their withdrawal. "Admiral, this is Commander Lee," she reported. "The Xanthari are running. I repeat, the enemy is retreating from the system. This is the first time any galactic force has made them withdraw." Admiral Brooks could hardly believe what she was hearing. Every report from previous battles had described the Xanthari as relentless and unstoppable. They had never retreated from any fight, and they had never shown any sign of fear. But now they were fleeing from human ships and abandoning a planet they had held for weeks. "All ships, this is Admiral Brooks," she announced over the fleet frequency. "Secure the system and begin search and rescue operations. We have just achieved something that no other species has managed since this war began. We have defeated the Xanthari in open battle." As the human fleet moved into orbit around Kepler, Prime, the rescued survivors, began transmitting messages of disbelief and gratitude. The Altarian refugees, who had been hiding in underground shelters, could not understand how the humans had succeeded where their own military had failed. Elder Velkith of the Altarian Republic contacted Admiral Brooks directly, and his voice shook with emotion as he spoke. "Human Admiral, we had given up hope of rescue." News of humanity's victory at Kepler traveled through the galaxy like wildfire and reached the survivors of every broken civilization within days. On the fortress world of Korth, Prime Psionic Master Veltar sat in his meditation chamber watching recordings of the human fleet battle for the third time. His ancient mind struggled to understand what he had witnessed. The humans fought without the elegant strategies that had defined galactic warfare for millennia. They used crude weapons and brutal tactics that civilized species had abandoned long ago. But somehow their primitive approach had succeeded where the most advanced military forces in the galaxy had failed. Veltar activated his communication array and sent a message directly to Earth Command. The Korth Dominion had never asked another species for military assistance, but desperate times called for desperate measures. If the humans could teach his people how to fight the Xanthari, then perhaps there was still hope for survival. Captain Steve Rogers received new orders while his battle-damaged ship was undergoing repairs at a human supply depot. He was to command a joint task force that would liberate 3 Xanthari-occupied systems simultaneously. The plan was ambitious and dangerous, but it represented a new approach to fighting the enemy. "Captain Rogers, this is Admiral Stone," came the transmission from Earth Command. "Your task force will include vessels from the Valderon Empire and Altarian Republic. This will be the first time human forces have operated in direct coordination with alien allies. Show them how we fight." Steve looked at the tactical briefings and felt excitement building in his chest. The joint fleet would combine human aggressive tactics with alien technology and knowledge. Valderon shield generators would protect human ships during close-range attacks. Altarian navigation systems would allow precise hyperspace jumps that could surprise enemy formations. The first target was the Trian system, where millions of refugees had been trapped for months. The Xanthari had established a blockade around the inhabited planets and were slowly consuming the population. Previous rescue attempts by Valderon and Altarian forces had failed with heavy losses. Commander Susan Lee led the fighter escort for the Liberation Fleet and marveled at the alien spacecraft flying beside her human squadrons. Valderon fighters used energy shields that could deflect Xanthari bioweapons. Altarian interceptors had faster-than-light communication systems that allowed real-time coordination across vast distances. "All pilots, this is Commander Lee," she announced over the multi-species communication channel. "Remember that our alien allies have different combat doctrines than we do. They prefer defensive tactics and careful maneuvering. Do not be surprised if they seem hesitant to engage at close range." The combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Trian system and immediately came under attack from Xanthari bioships. But this time, the enemy faced something they had never encountered before. Human ships charged forward with guns blazing while their alien escorts provided covering fire and electronic support. Captain Alex Morgan commanded the flagship of the joint operation and watched with satisfaction as human and alien crews began working together in ways that neither side had thought possible. Valderon gunners learned to target the weak points that human intelligence had identified. Altarian pilots began using the aggressive attack patterns that humans had perfected. All ships, this is Captain Morgan, he transmitted to the combined fleet. Execute attack pattern Delta 7. Human vessels will engage at close range while our allies provide support fire. Remember that we are stronger together than any of us could be alone. Dr. Helen Carter worked in the medical bay of the flagship, treating wounded from both human and alien species. She had studied xenobiology, but had never actually treated alien patients before the war began. Now she was developing new medical techniques that could save lives regardless of whether the patient had 2 legs or 8. Dr. Carter, we have incoming casualties from the Valderon destroyer, announced her assistant. Multiple bioweapon injuries and some kind of neural damage from Xanthari psionic attacks. Helen grabbed her medical kit and rushed to the airlock where Valderon soldiers were being brought aboard. The aliens were tall and thin with silver skin and large eyes that glowed with internal light. Their wounds were unlike anything she had seen, but the principles of trauma medicine were universal. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster led a joint ground assault team that included human Marines and Altarian commandos. The aliens were skilled fighters, but they had been trained for defensive operations. Amy's job was to teach them how to attack Xanthari positions with the kind of relentless aggression that humans had perfected. Listen up, people, Amy announced to her mixed species team. The Xanthari are expecting us to use standard siege tactics. Instead, we are going to hit them fast and hard from multiple directions. Human squads will breach their perimeter, while Altarian units provide suppressing fire. The assault on the main Xanthari breeding facility went better than anyone had expected. The alien commandos quickly adapted to human tactics and began showing the kind of fierce determination that had surprised their own commanders. Fighting alongside humans seemed to awaken something primal in the civilized species that they had forgotten during their long peace. Commander Ryan Davis coordinated intelligence gathering from multiple sources and was amazed at how much they were learning about Xanthari biology and tactics. Human medical researchers worked with Altarian scientists to develop biological weapons that could target the enemy's organic ships. Valderon engineers helped human technicians improve their weapon systems. Admiral Brooks, this is Commander Davis, he reported from the Intelligence Center. We have confirmed that Xanthari bioships are vulnerable to modified Earth viruses. Dr. Carter's medical team has developed a delivery system that can be deployed by standard missile warheads. The second phase of the liberation involved attacking the orbital platforms where the Xanthari were processing captured civilians. The platforms were living structures that digested organic matter and converted it into nutrients for the bioships. The sight was horrifying, but it also revealed a critical weakness in the enemy war machine. Captain Maria Santos led a combined fighter squadron in an attack on the largest processing platform. Her pilots included humans flying modified fighters and Valderon aces in energy-shielded interceptors. The mixed formation confused the Xanthari biofighters, who had evolved to counter single-species tactics. All pilots, this is Captain Santos, she called out as they approached the target. The platform's defensive systems are organic computers that learn from previous attacks. But they have never seen human and Valderon fighters working together. Use that confusion to get in close. The attack succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. The processing platform's biological defenses could not adapt fast enough to counter the unpredictable combination of human aggression and Valderon technology. Within minutes, The massive structure was dying and releasing thousands of prisoners who had been awaiting execution. On the surface of Tryon Crime, Lieutenant Colonel Jake Thompson worked with Korath psionic warriors to clear Xanthari ground forces from the major population centers. The aliens could kill enemies with their minds, but they had never learned to coordinate their mental attacks with conventional weapons. Master Zaleth, watch how my Marines operate, Jake explained to the lead Korath warrior. We use suppressing fire to keep the enemy in position, while assault teams move to flanking positions. Your psionic attacks can replace our heavy weapons if you time them correctly. The Korath warrior studied the human tactics with growing understanding. His people had always fought as individuals using their mental powers in single combat. But Jake was showing him how to integrate psionic abilities into coordinated unit actions that multiplied their effectiveness. The liberation of Tryon system was completed in less than 18 hours. The Xanthari retreated rather than face the combined human-alien forces that had proven capable of adapting faster than their biological computers could counter. For the second time in the war, the enemy had been forced to abandon territory they had held. Admiral Katie Brooks received reports from all three target systems and felt a growing sense of optimism. The joint operations were succeeding beyond their most ambitious projections. More importantly, the alien allies were learning to fight with the kind of determined creativity that humans took for granted. All task force commanders, this is Admiral Brooks, she transmitted to the scattered fleets. Phase 1 of the counteroffensive is complete. The Xanthari have been driven from 3 systems, and their advance has been halted for the first time since the war began. Prepare for Phase 2. Operations. Elder Velketh of the Altarian Republic sent a personal message to Admiral Brooks that showed how much had changed since the humans joined the war. The proud alien leader who had once dismissed humanity as primitive barbarians now spoke with genuine respect and gratitude. Admiral Brooks, your people have given us something we had lost, Elder Velketh said in his transmission. You have reminded us that survival sometimes requires fighting with everything you have. My people are ready to follow human leadership in the battles to come. Similar messages arrived from Valderon commanders and Korath masters. The war reached its final phase at the Nexus Gate, an ancient hyperspace junction that controlled access to the galaxy's core systems. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Xanthari were gathering every remaining bioship for one massive assault. That would either secure their dominion over the galaxy or destroy them completely in the attempt. Admiral Katie Brooks stood on the bridge of the flagship TDF Unity and looked at the largest fleet in galactic history assembled before her. Human ships flew alongside vessels from every free species in the galaxy. Valderon battle cruisers with their gleaming energy shields. Altarian carriers launching squadrons of fighters. Korath dreadnoughts crackling with psionic energy. And scattered among them, the battered but determined ships of a dozen refugee species. Fleet commanders, this is Admiral Brooks, she announced over the combined communication channels. Long-range sensors confirm that the Xanthari are massing their entire remaining force at the Nexus Gate. This will be the largest battle in galactic history, and the outcome will determine whether freedom survives in our galaxy. Captain Alex Morgan commanded the human battle group from the bridge of the TDF Retribution. His ship had been damaged in 3 previous battles, but his crew had kept her fighting with spare parts and determination. Around him, alien officers worked alongside human technicians, preparing for the battle that would decide everything. General Vexron of the Valderon Empire stood beside Alex on the bridge, studying the tactical displays. 6 months ago, the proud alien warrior would never have accepted human leadership, but the war had changed everything. Now he looked to Alex for the kind of tactical innovation that had turned the tide against the Xanthari. Captain Morgan, my fleet is ready to follow your battle plan, General Vexron said with genuine respect. Your people have taught us that honor sometimes requires fighting without honor. Today we will show the Xanthari what civilized species can accomplish when they remember how to be savage. Admiral Krisha of the Altarian Republic contacted the flagship from her command vessel. Her people had lost their homeworld to the Xanthari, but they had learned to fight back under human guidance. Now her surviving ships carried weapons that combined Altarian technology with human ruthlessness. Admiral Brooks, this is Admiral Krisha, came the transmission. My pilots are requesting permission to use the kamikaze tactics that Captain Santos taught them. They understand that some of them will not return, but they are eager to make the Xanthari pay for what they did to our worlds. Psionic Master Veltar of the Korath Dominion meditated in his command chamber while his dreadnoughts moved into position. His mental powers had grown stronger during the war as he learned to focus his abilities with the kind of aggressive intent the humans took for granted. Today, he would use those powers not for defense, but for total annihilation. The battle began when long-range sensors detected the Xanthari fleet approaching the Nexus Gate. The enemy formation was massive beyond anything they had faced before. Thousands of bioships ranging from fighter-sized organisms to creatures the size of moons. They moved through space like a living plague that devoured everything in its path. All ships, this is Admiral Brooks, she commanded as the enemy fleet entered weapons range. Execute Battle Plan Omega. Human vessels will spearhead the attack while our allies provide support and coordination. Remember that today we fight not just for our own survival, but for the survival of all life in the galaxy. Captain Steve Rogers led the first wave of the assault with a mixed squadron of human destroyers and Valderon cruisers. The enemy bioships immediately swung toward them, but this time the Xanthari faced opponents who had learned to work together with devastating effectiveness. All ships, this is Captain Rogers, he called out as his formation engaged the enemy. Vanguard, target the command organisms first. Intel says they use biological communication networks, so killing their leaders will disrupt their coordination. Show them what 6 months of fighting humans has taught us. Commander Susan Lee launched her fighter squadrons into the swirling chaos of the space battle. Her pilots included humans flying nuclear-armed interceptors and Altarian aces in energy-shielded fighters. Together, they had developed tactics that neither species could have managed alone. The space around Nexus Gate became a three-dimensional battlefield stretching across millions of kilometers. BO ships the size of cities exchanged fire, with combined fleets that represented every free species in the galaxy. Nuclear explosions lit up the darkness as human weapons tore through living hulls that had never been designed to face such primitive but effective firepower. Captain Maria Santos led a desperate attack on the largest Xanthari command ship, a creature so massive that it had its own gravity field. Her squadron included volunteer pilots from 6 different species, all flying ships loaded with experimental weapons developed during the war. All pilots, this is Captain Santos, she announced as they approached the monster. That thing is the brain of their entire fleet. If we can kill it, the rest of their forces will lose coordination. This is a one-way mission, but we can end the war today if we succeed. On the surface of the nearest planet, Colonel Jake Thompson led the largest ground assault in human history. The Xanthari had turned the world into a massive breeding ground for their bioships, but now they faced an army that included soldiers from every species that had learned to fight like humans. All ground units, this is Colonel Thompson, he commanded as dropships landed under heavy fire. The enemy has fortified this entire planet, but they have never faced a combined assault from civilized species that have remembered how to wage total war. No quarter asked and none given. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster led joint assault teams through the organic structures that the Xanthari had grown across the planet's surface. Her soldiers included human marines and Korath warriors, and Valderon commandos, all fighting with a kind of coordinated brutality that the enemy could not counter. The battle raged for 7 days and 7 nights without pause. Ships were destroyed and rebuilt. Soldiers fell and were replaced by reserves who fought even harder to avenge their fallen comrades. The Zenthari threw everything they had at the combined fleet, but for the first time in the war, they faced opponents who could match their savagery and exceed their determination. Commander Ryan Davis coordinated the intelligence war from his position. On the flagship, human-computer viruses attacked Zenthari bionetworks, while Korath psionics disrupted their communication systems. The enemy had evolved to counter individual threats, but they could not adapt fast enough to counter the combined assault. Admiral Brooks, this is Commander Davis, he reported as his teams achieved a breakthrough. We have identified the Queen ship at the center of their formation. It is controlling the entire Zenthari fleet through biological command signals. If we can destroy it, their forces will collapse. Admiral Brooks studied the tactical displays and saw the massive bioship that served as the brain of the enemy fleet. It was protected by layers of smaller vessels and defended by weapons that could destroy entire planets. But it was also the single point of failure that could end the war. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Brooks, she announced over the command channel. We have identified the enemy's weak point. I am authorizing the final assault. All ships, concentrate on the Queen ship, regardless of cost. This is our chance to end the Zenthari threat forever. Captain Alex Morgan volunteered to lead the final attack, even though it meant almost certain death. His ship was already damaged, and his crew was exhausted, but they had come too far to stop now. Around him, alien officers from 3 different species prepared to die alongside humans in the ultimate expression of the unity that the war had forged. All ships, this is Captain Morgan, he called out as the assault fleet formed up for the final attack. Today we finish what the Zenthari started when they decided to destroy every living thing in the galaxy. Today we show them that life fights back. The assault on the Queen ship was the most desperate action of the entire war. Human vessels used themselves as shields to protect alien ships that carried the weapons needed to penetrate the creature's defenses. Alien crews sacrificed their own vessels to clear paths for human bombers. Loaded with planet-killing warheads, Psionic Master Veltar focused his mental powers with an intensity that would have killed him before the war taught him to channel his abilities with human-like aggression. His psionic attack tore through the Queen ship's biological defenses and left it vulnerable to conventional weapons. Commander Susan Lai led the final bombing run that delivered the killing blow. Her squadron included only 12 surviving fighters, but they carried enough firepower to crack a moon. As they dove toward the Queen ship's brain cluster, she felt proud to die alongside pilots from 4 different species who had all learned to fight like humans. The Queen ship's death scream echoed across hyperspace and reached every Zenthari organism in the galaxy. The bioships that had seemed unstoppable suddenly lost coordination and began attacking each other in mindless panic. The swarm that had threatened to devour all life collapsed into chaotic fragments that posed no threat to anyone. Captain Steve? Rogers broadcast the victory message from his battered command ship as the surviving Zenthari bioships fled into deep space.